What's up guys, it's Paraly5er here, and today we're doing a tier list of all of the ranged weapons in Grounded 1.2. As you can see on the screen here, we have all of the ranged weapons, including the bows, the staves, all the different arrows, and all of the different turret rounds as well. Obviously, as always, this is my opinion. Everyone knows I'm not huge on the ranged weapons in Grounded, and to be honest with you, I've barely even touched the turret shots. I don't really know much about them, just that they exist. We're going to be starting off with the Sprig bow. Now, this is the only tier 1 bow in the game. It's a solid B, I guess. Doesn't do much damage. It's a bow, like, it's the first ranged bow you can get in the game. Then we have the Insect bow, which I'm also going to put in B, and again, very similar. It doesn't have any special effects, it's just a regular bow. I'm going to put the Crossbow in A, because personally, I know different people have different opinions, but personally, I think the crossbows are better than the bows in Grounded, so for that reason, I'm putting the crossbow above the bow. I'm going to put the Black Ox crossbow in A as well, as again, the crossbows are really, really strong, especially for taking out things like scarabs, they can be pretty useful. And then finally, the Bard's bow. I'm actually going to put this in A alongside the two crossbows. Now, the reason for this is this bow can actually be really, really powerful when combined with Bardic Inspiration as well as Apex Predator. It can actually summon wasps and buff teammates. Now, obviously, this is only useful when you have multiple people, so me playing solo, it isn't that good. But I know for people playing multiplayer, this can be really, really useful. The reason it's not quite S is because it still doesn't do a lot of damage. Next, we have the Spicy Staff. I'm going to say this is S tier. I have to admit, this is one of the best ranged weapons in Grounded, especially for taking on things weak to spicy. This is particularly good in the Broodmother boss fight, where it can take out all the spiderlings with a single shot. It has charged attack as well, which is even more powerful, and this thing is really, really strong. I'd highly recommend you use this as a ranged weapon, but mostly if your enemy is weak to spicy. Don't just use it against everything. Next, we have the Sour Staff. I'm going to put it in A. Now, I do really like this weapon against the moths in the game. The problem with this weapon and the staves in general is that there's a big delay between blocking after you shoot, which they introduced, which is really, really annoying. And it also makes no sense because the crossbows can block now even after you've shot, like before you reload. Whereas these staves, they can't block. They have a delay. I don't know why there's a delay. We need to remove the delay. And it's a pretty big issue. But I'd still say it's a solid A tier weapon. The main problem here is it does sour damage. Not a lot of enemies are weak to sour. I know a lot aren't resistant to it, but I like weapons that enemies are weak to. Finally, we have the Mint Staff, which is going in D tier. Now, the reason for this is it's a fraud of a ranged weapon. It's a ranged weapon that reaches about 3 centimeters in front of the player. It does very little damage. Its special effect is to slow enemies down, which is useless. It is god-awful. I would not recommend this staff to my worst enemy. If you want to take out things like mosquitoes, you're better off using an axe or a Scythe of Blossoms than you are using this silly little staff. Up next, we have the Brat Burst. Now, as a weapon, the Brat Burst isn't great. I'm going to put it in B tier. And I'm also going to put the Splat Burst alongside. Actually, I'll put the Splat Burst one lower. Now, the reason I'm putting the Brat Burst in B tier is because as a weapon, it isn't great. It can be useful for the Broodmother fight, for taking out the little spiderlings, but as an actual weapon, it's not great. Where this really comes into play is the utility of this weapon is really good. Because you can use it to break rocks, you can use it to open doors, there's a lot of uses for the Brat Burst and Splat Burst in the game. The reason the Splat Burst is lower is because it's just a Brat Burst, except you've chucked some sap and cobwebs on it so it sticks to surfaces. You don't need to get it to stick to surfaces. It's completely unimportant, so for that reason it goes a tier lower, because it's just more expensive for absolutely nothing. Then we have the Blaster of the Moldy Matriarchy. How good is this weapon? I am going to put this in B tier. Now, hear me out here. This weapon is pretty powerful. It does a lot of damage. To get this weapon, you have to beat the hardest boss in the game, which, to summon that boss, you need a Mantis head, which means you need to kill the Mantis. You need a Wasp Queen head, which means you need to kill the Wasp Queen. You need Broodmother chunks, you need to kill the Broodmother. So to get this weapon, you need to kill 4 bosses, and you need to kill the infected Broodmother quite a few times. At that point, you're already at the end of the game. Now, is the weapon good? Yeah, it's pretty powerful. But, like, you've already beat the game by the point you get it. Like, what you're going to do, go and just kill random stuff? It doesn't work against the most important enemy, which is the infected broodmother. It literally does no damage. In fact, it does the opposite. It heals the enemy. So if you're at the end of the game, I would recommend this weapon. But it just takes forever to get, and the big problem as well is that it also hurts you. If you hit yourself too close with the bomb, it will damage your own player, which makes it really difficult for fighting enemies because most enemies are going to come towards you for close range combat to try and hit you, and you're just going to end up damaging yourself. I don't recommend this weapon at all. Finally, in terms of explosives, we have the bomb arrows. I'm going to say these are A tier. Now, these are really expensive to craft. They do cost gunpowder, but with the new Super Duper, you can duplicate them, which is quite nice. As a weapon, they are relatively strong, but as a utility item, they are even stronger, allowing you to harvest almost any material in the game due to their tier 3-ness. You can basically harvest anything except like pond moss and tier 2 clay nodes. So essentially, anything you want, you can break with these arrows, which is really nice. If you have a lot of raw science or just a lot of bomb arrows, you can just carry these around everywhere you go. Next, I'm going to rank all 3 of the regular arrow types at once. Now, for those who don't know, there is a Wasp Queen trinket in the game, which, when equipped, gives you a chance to refund ammo upon shooting a bow. So if you're using any of these 3 ammo types here and you have a Wasp Queen trinket, you can farm infinite arrows just by shooting the floor or a wall in front of you, and you will gain arrows over time. So technically, all 3 of these arrows, their recipes are irrelevant. Out of the 3, I really like the feather arrows. I'm going to put them in S tier. Now, this might be controversial, but the reason I really like these arrows is A, like I just said, if you have a Wasp Queen trinket, you can farm these infinitely. So you don't have to worry about crafting them, because I know the recipe for this is a pain. They give a bleed effect to the enemy. They do very similar damage to the Splinter. I think the Feather does 15 and the Splinter does 20. But the Feather Arrows give a bleed effect, which is going to do damage over time, which is really, really good. So for that reason, these are the best base arrow to use in the game. Then I'm going to put the regular arrows in A alongside the Splinter in B, actually. Now, the reason I don't like the Splinter arrows, they have a lot more drop-off, which I'm not a fan of. It makes it harder to hit your shots, whereas the regular arrows are a lot more direct, especially with a crossbow. They basically hit exactly where you shoot. I know that the Splinter arrows do more damage than the regular arrows, but, you know, that's to be expected. One's tier 1 and one's tier 3. Next, we have the regular Venom Arrows. Now, I'm going to be honest, I'm going to put these in C tier. I wouldn't really recommend using them. They're not expensive to craft necessarily, but a Spider Venom every time isn't great. It's not cheap, you know. The Venom is useful, I guess. It's a little bit of poison damage to your enemy over time, but it's not enough damage for, like, a boss fight or something you're going to carry around and use all the time when you're going around the backyard. Gas arrows, again, these are probably C tier. They're just expensive to craft, and you don't need them to kill every single enemy in the game. I don't see why you would want to use these, really. Lure arrows are D tier. They are useless. Pollen arrows are also D tier. These are a good idea. They're supposed to stun flying enemies, but they don't work on the wasps, which is the one thing I want to use them on, and they don't work at all. So for that reason, they're a D tier arrow. They need to be made way more effective at grounding enemies in the game. Next, we have the Mint Arrows. Now, I don't really like the Elemental Arrows, if I'm completely honest. The Mint Arrow doesn't really have much use, if I'm honest. So I'm going to put it in D. I'm also going to put the Sour and the Spicy in D. These are pretty expensive to craft, and they're just not worth it. But I am going to put the Salty Arrows in S tier. Now, salt is a lot easier to get than any of the other candies at the bottom here. And the biggest advantage is you can use this against the Wasp Queen and the Mantis. This is really good for the Mantis. You just walk around the tree and it can't catch you, and you just keep shooting the Mantis. It's really, really effective. When it comes to the Wasp Queen, also really effective because it's a flying enemy, and these are really, really good. I highly recommend them. You can also use this against the Assistant Manager, believe it or not, but they're kind of hard to get that early in the game, to be honest. Next up, we have Super Gas Arrows. Now, obviously, these do a lot more damage than Gas Arrows, but they're a lot more expensive. They require Super Gas Sacks, and they're just not worth it. They're way, way too expensive. You just can't reliably use these long term. The only time I can really see myself using these craftable arrows is maybe in a boss fight if I'm really struggling, but in that case, I would go with the elemental weakness of the enemy, which is like salty. I wouldn't choose something like gas, because a lot of the enemies actually, especially bosses, are immune to gas. Fun fact. Then there's the Super Venom Arrows. I'll put these in like B. A lot of the bosses and enemies, like I say as well, are resistant to poison damage. But they can have their uses in certain situations. Like, they can be useful for, like, scarabs and stuff. I guess the gas arrows are good against scarabs as well. But they can be useful if you really, really need the poison damage, but I wouldn't recommend using them at all. Finally, we have all of these turret rounds. Now, I haven't used these a crazy amount, because these are mostly for, like, multiplayer players, but I'll quickly go over what they do. So you've got the regular pebblet rounds, these are just pebblets. The sappy rounds, which slow your enemies down. The charcoal rounds, which leave like a fire on the ground, which sets fire to your enemies and does damage over time. The explosive rounds, which explode. You have the pollen rounds, which are supposed to knock the enemies out of the sky. And then finally, you have these like thistle rounds, I think. They basically shoot really, really fast. So the pebblet rounds are just the base version. I'm going to put these in C. They're nothing crazy. I don't really use them that much. These ones are a little faster, but they don't do a lot of damage. So these are probably also C. The sappy rounds, I don't really like the effect of slowing enemies down, so I'm going to put this in D. Pollen rounds would be really good for base defense, so I'm going to put these in B. I think the problem is they probably don't knock half the stuff out the sky, and not a lot of the defenses require like flying enemies and stuff, so you probably don't need them. The fire, I'm going to put the everlasting charcoal ones in S. Now the reason for this is having fire on the ground would actually be really useful in multiplayer if you're trying to do the mixer defenses. You could use these charcoal rounds to lay fire areas on the ground so that when the enemies are trying to get towards the mixer, they take a load of damage over time, and it would be a really effective way of doing it. Then finally, the splody rounds. I'm going to put these in C tier. They're not very powerful, they're not great, and they also don't have as much power as any of the other bombs, as they are unable to explode most of the stuff that regular bombs can blow up. So I'm not a fan of them. That's the complete ranged tier list. Obviously, I don't like using ranged as much as melee in this game, so feel free to leave your opinions in the comments down below. Just don't go too harsh on me, as I know a lot of you have some very strong opinions. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, please leave a like on it, and I'll see you in the next Grounded video. Have a great rest of your day.